All right, well, it is a new week in our class, and the focus is on qualitative data collection and analysis. And so you will be doing a couple of things with regard to that. But first, I wanted to talk about the literature review, finishing grading those. What I've done is kind of faded the support that I give you over time as you gain in your knowledge of APA formatting and also just writing in general and how to do a literature review. And so the way that I've done that is just kind of highlighted things in the works that you've given me. And so I'll highlight a different sentence or a phrase or something like that that needs to be revised. And then you'll figure out how to revise it and what might be wrong with it. Hopefully you see that there's something wrong with what I've highlighted and can make the adjustments. By now, hopefully you have an idea of that. Also, the fading continues to happen, the fading of my support, and that means that the literature review is the last assignment that you can resubmit work for. So from here on out, you can't submit assignments and actually get them reviewed and then resubmit them. So be sure to make sure that it's a good assignment, you're ready to go with that assignment before you submit it to me. And whatever grade you get on those, that's the grade you'll get. So there's no changing and resubmitting. But I do want to warn you too, don't submit something that's not ready, because I would like to go ahead and just grade what I get in the Dropbox as I get it and not wait until a little bit later. So that's a warning. So make sure that you get that feedback, and if you would like to resubmit the lit review assignment, you can, but that's the last one. Now, another reminder too is that good literature reviews are critical of the studies that they are reviewing. So in other words, you might find some flaws in those studies. And we'll talk about this in the discussion this week, some flaws in scientific research on a larger scale. But you might find some things that may not be so good as part of a study, and you could talk about that as well. And being critical of studies is important, and so there's an assignment that we'll do next week where you will evaluate an article and have to do that. So that's a good intro to this week, and again, I should have all those literature reviews graded. I have most all of them graded already, so just a few more, I think. So very soon. This week you'll read chapters 19 and 20, and those are on qualitative data collection and qualitative data analysis. And then also chapter 21 on preparing a research report, and there are slides with all those chapters as usual. We have a discussion, and I've recorded a presentation that you'll watch about whether scientific research has all of the answers. And you can take a look at the presentation. You need to take a look at the presentation, watch that, and then maybe share your reaction to that presentation about whether scientific research can answer all of our questions. And also share in your future or current professional work or life in general, how will learning about research in this class and other experiences help you answer the questions that you have. Because that's the idea. It's supposed to, experimental or scientific research, not just experimental, but scientific research should give you answers to the questions that you might have. And how will learning about it in this class hopefully help you to answer those questions. Also, I've provided a link to the slides if you wanted to take a closer look at some of the links provided within that presentation on some of the articles that are cited there as you watch it. And then, of course, the final proposal is due this week. Now, I talked about what the final proposal is last week, so take a look at the video from last week if you want to see what is required here. But basically, you're putting everything together, and this is the outline that you will follow. And you'll have a cover page, and you'll add a cover page and an abstract if you haven't already added one into your previous work, and then a planned data analysis section for your final proposal. And then you'll submit that. And I talked about data analysis a little bit before, different data analysis methods. So you'll want to take and choose a data analysis method that works well for your study and go with that. And discuss that in some detail though. Talk about what the process will be like, what you'll do first, what will be the outcome of that. You don't know the exact outcome, but you'll be able to determine whether there's a relationship between something and something else probably, so you could say that in your final proposal. Now I have an example final research proposal. One thing I wanted to mention about this that I think I shared with you before too is that this one has a table of contents and I think a list of figures or a list of tables. Those are not required. You don't have to have a list of figures or a list of tables, and you don't need a table of contents for your final proposal. So don't worry about that. Just to take a little sneak peek at next week, you'll have a chapter to review or to read, and of course exam number 3, the last exam for the class. We'll have a discussion on reporting and critiquing research, but there are a couple of assignments, and there's no reason I don't think why you could get going on these assignments very soon too if you had extra time this week. So first one is evaluate a research article. You're basically going to select an article from your literature review, and you're going to complete task 11 from the textbook on page 611. And there is an attached assignment to download the included form and fill out for this assignment. So you fill out a form about the article. You're basically going to be a critical analyst of the article and select whether the different items that it asks for are present in the article. And then overall you're going to give some kind of evaluation of whether this was a quality research article or not, a quality research study done or not. So that's important, right? It's important to analyze the quality or evaluate the quality of a research article. And then the last assignment listed here is a letter of consent, and you're going to create a letter of consent for those participating in your research study. We're going all the way back to the earliest part of the semester where you learned about research ethics and how important it is that each person who participates in a research study that you might conduct is informed in their consent to participate. So you're going to have to include elements that are listed here. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory, so I don't think I need to go through them, but you'll want to include all the different items that are required for a consent letter and submit that as well next week. So those are the 2 things that are due next week. But for this week, make sure you just get that final proposal in. Okay, one thing I wanted to talk about with literature reviews is citing an author or authors, and this is a good reminder, especially as you move forward. You might do future academic writing, and this website is a nice one, the Purdue OWL, as I had mentioned before, and for in-text citations. So this is in-text citations. It says a work by 2 authors or a work by 1 author. It would be the same way. You just put the last name and last name, or if it was just one last name, it'd just be Petty, and then comma, and then the year. But if it's a work by 3 to 5 authors, that means that the article you're citing has been written by 3 to 5 authors, either 3, 4, or 5 authors. The first time in the narrative that you cite the source, you would go to, you would do something like this. You list all of the authors, up to 5. You'd list all of the authors and then have the year. But in subsequent citations, that means every time that you cite that same article again in your paper. Now, if you never cite it again, that you won't have to do this, but if you cite it again, you're going to change it to just the first author and then et al., 1993. And et al. Just has the et space al period, and then the comma goes before the year. So that's how to do et al. For a work by 3 to 5 authors. Now, if a work has 6 or more authors, it's always just going to be et al., because you don't want to ever list so many authors. Like, you could have 10 authors in an article, and you're never going to list them all because you're just going to list the first author, Harris et al. 2001, for instance. So that's something to realize with that use of et al. I think I saw people using that somewhat appropriately, but also sometimes maybe not appropriately. All right, finally, let's talk about the topics for this week and discuss these. So qualitative data analysis and qualitative data collection are the topics for this week. And we're going into that realm of collection of data that is for qualitative research, which is more about feelings, understandings, and experiences rather than the quantitative numeric type of things that you want to gather with quantitative research. So with qualitative research, usually data collection involves fieldwork, and that requires the researcher to immerse him or herself in the setting over time. So there are different methods that you'll use for qualitative data collection, but they often involve one of these four, and that's observations, interviews, questionnaires, and document analysis. So those are the different types of data collection methods. They're very different from, as you notice, quantitative, where you're trying to find an instrument that will get you numbers. So observations include a whole bunch of different things that you'll read about, watching participants, obviously, participant observation versus non-participant observation. There are a lot of things that you'll read about with observations. There's a whole bunch of different types of ones, so know your differences between these different types of observations that you read. Field notes are when you are observing, you take notes. You document date, site, time, and topic. You write in the field during observation. You don't just do these back when you get to your office or back home. You record descriptions of what happens separate from your own reflection upon what happens, but field notes could include a reflection from yourself on what happens. And you don't really discuss your experiences until you have the field notes down. And you don't want to have somebody else's discussion with you influence your own thinking about the observations that you're making when you make field notes. So during observations, you make field notes, basically, in quantitative or in a qualitative point of view. So here's an example of a form that could be used for field notes. And this is for looking at different areas of the city and maybe observing different types of birds or different types of other animals. Here's one that is talking about what happened in a certain location. Arrived to find Mensame and Epek there, baby asleep, and was routed to bathe him. Did not cry when roused and merely blinked. This is an observation that is made. And remember, qualitative research and quantitative research, which one do you think produces the most amount of data when it's over? It is definitely qualitative research. Qualitative research provides so much data after it's over, and it's so much more work to do. Which one is more work to do? It's obviously qualitative research, because you have to go through all of the data, and you also have to spend a long time in the field observing, interviewing, whatever it is. That's much longer than the short kind of quantitative testing where you have a quick intervention and then you just test the groups to see if there's a difference. So other field notes examples, this is handwritten field notes, even with a picture of what's happening. And another one that's just a nice narrative of what somebody did, the Omaha Tribal Powwow. Okay, so you have interviews as well, and it will talk about how structured interviews are different than unstructured interviews. Structured interviews had predetermined questions. Unstructured are like a conversation where it can go almost anywhere. And different skills that are important for those you'll read about. And here's some interview questions. This is a structured interview. You can have a certain list of questions to go for. How do you see yourself today in terms of your deafness? What does your deafness mean to you? And so forth. And with a qualitative research study, you might go ahead and interview 10 people who are deaf on this experience. And then, of course, you would record the conversation. So any interview that you do with qualitative research, you're recording the conversation. You don't want to take notes during it, because then you're not looking at the person, paying attention to them. You record it, and then later on, you're going to take every word that was said and transcribe it. That means to type it up, everything that was said, and then that gives you your data source to be analyzed. There's a lot of work involved. And there are different types of interviews that you'll learn about as well. And even questionnaires can be qualitative. They can be quantitative as well. But this is an example of maybe a qualitative questionnaire. Have you been to a festival? If yes, which ones? And if not, why not? What would make you want to go to a festival? How many festivals can you name? And so forth. These are more questions about someone's experience and feelings rather than just leading to numeric information like a quantitative questionnaire would do. And then you have document analysis. And this is an opportunity for you to also view documents that may have some connection to the research study that you're doing. So you might take a look at archival documents, journals, maps, video and audio, as long as it has some connection to the qualitative study that your unit of study that you're looking at. So those are the different qualitative data collection methods. And there are some things that it will talk about in the book about validity and reliability in qualitative research as well. But I will tell you that some people are like this meme here, where they say, you know, oh, tell me about how all your feelings and intuitions guided you through the research process. And in fact, a lot of quantitative researchers look at qualitative research as maybe not having a lot of validity and reliability. And yet there is a pretty growing theoretical base for, you know, how to build reliability and validity in qualitative research. And so you'll read about that. And if you're doing a qualitative research proposal, you'll want to talk about this. You want to talk about how you'll make sure that validity and reliability are there in your study. What are the areas that they will be there? What are the specific things that the book talks about that will be in your study to make it reliable and valid? So that's qualitative data collection. Let's talk about analysis a little bit. And this involves summarizing data in a dependable and accurate manner from a qualitative research study. And then you interpret it. You find meaning in the data. So you summarize the data, and then you also find meaning in the data. And this is a very, very involved process. Even smaller studies that I've been involved in on the qualitative side take a lot of time, a lot of work, and you have to document every step of the way. And reviewers who you might try to submit your article to be published to want to know exactly what steps you followed in this process. So they want you to document that as you write up your research. So the researcher's self is the one who does the qualitative analysis and interpretation. It always has to be the researcher, him or herself. You can't say, oh, I'm going to take this to my team and have them look at it, because they weren't the ones who were out in the field observing. They weren't the ones who did the interviews, so they may not know the way that you should do it. So it's always the researcher's self, pretty much always. Although I suppose you could have bigger groups doing it. Qualitative analysis is interpretive. That means it's always going to be interpreted from the researcher's own point of view. And so that needs to be acknowledged as well. You need to talk about that in your study and say, well, it's, you know, this is my point of view on the topic, so that might have affected the way that I wrote about this. All right, so there's a process. You're organizing the data, you're categorizing the data, you're going to synthesize the data, you're going to analyze the data, and then you'll write it up. And I guess I'll talk about each one of these in turn really quickly. Basically, you take the data that you've organized. Let's say it's an interview study, and you have taken the data, you've done the interviews, and you have transcribed the interviews, meaning you've typed them up. After that, you are going to organize that data. So let's say your study was about, again, people's feelings about deafness. You're going to take a look at the examples or the aspects of one's life having to deal with not being able to hear. And then you'll organize the data in that way, or categorize the data. That begins the categorizing of the data in that way. And then you take all of the different quotes from the interviews that talked about this specific aspect of not being able to hear and put those together in one group. And that's kind of like synthesizing the data. It's putting it together into one group. And then you're kind of taking a look at what that means. You know, what did people really say about not being able to hear in that specific area? And so that would be analyzing. And you're making meaning, basically. You're saying, I'm analyzing this. You're saying, what does this mean? And you're also connecting it back to the literature review that you did and saying, this is an example of what is in the literature called this. And you start to analyze things. And then you write it up for a final write-up. You're going to continue to organize the data together. So generally it involves this process of taking the data and finding themes from the data, getting it into categories, syncing it together within those categories, and then finding meaning from that data. But it is a very involved and very long process that you'll read about. So that is qualitative data analysis. Hopefully this gives you a good introduction to the week's activities. And I think that's about it for this week. So good luck. We are on to our second to last week of class.